Colorado maintains a statewide database called the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. This statewide database contains information about every patient who is receiving or who has received controlled substances from their physician. The purpose of the PDP is to decrease the potential for abuse and misuse by making sure that all of the patient's providers are aware of the controlled substance prescriptions they're receiving from other physicians. Obviously, doctor shopping is one of the bigger issues associated with patients who become dependent or abuse controlled substances, and that simply is going to see more than one doctor, hoping to obtain or trying to obtain prescriptions from each. That is curtailed by the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program because it contains a record of who has prescribed controlled substances and whether they've been paid for and filled and picked up. So the PDP allows a provider to look at a patient's history with regard to controlled substances and use that information in making a decision about whether they're going to prescribe further controlled substances. It's a law in Colorado right now that providers check the PDP under most circumstances in which a controlled substance is going to be prescribed to make sure that the patient is not abusing the drug or there's no pattern of doctor shopping or pharmacy shopping or something like that. Now, I want you to think carefully for a minute about what you've just heard in regards to the information in the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. If it's a statewide registry, that means everyone with access to the program is able to see any person in the state who's received a controlled substance, even when those people are not being seen at your practice. That is a tremendous, tremendous confidentiality risk. As a medical assistant, you have lots of access to sensitive records. But for the most part, you only have access to the records of patients being seen by your physician in your clinic. You don't have access to the medical records, essentially, of everyone in this state. The Prescription Drug Monitoring Program is just that. It's a registry containing the names and identifying information of every single person in the state who has received a controlled substance, whether or not they are seen by your practice. Because that is such an unbelievably awesome power and responsibility, physicians were the only individuals permitted into the PDP to view the registry. They were given a set of credentials that applied only to them. It wasn't for their practice, it was for them as individuals, and they were the ones who had to jump into the PDP and determine if patients were eligible to receive further controlled substances. That law has changed, and physicians can now delegate that task to medical assistants under some very strict requirements. And in most cases, the requirement is simply that the physician can only designate one medical assistant to access the PDP on their behalf. You should always keep information confidential, but I can assure you that the misuse of the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program to look up information for patients who don't belong to your clinic or who have no immediate business before you will be a significant issue, and it will likely be a criminal issue. There's no end to the number of people in positions of trust that use controlled substances for any number of reasons. And again, not for negative reasons. If you were to look at the PDP on any given day, you might see the names of pastors and politicians and school leaders and teachers and people you know, people you recognize. And it would be entirely inappropriate and illegal for anyone to go on a fishing expedition in the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program to see if they recognize names or look up their ex-significant other or whatever the case might be. So when you access the PDP, I strongly advise you to make notations in your patient's chart about why you have accessed the PDP and what your particular purpose was at the time. both the state and the patient essentially have an interest in this. The state has an interest in it because they have the ability at any juncture to simply come back to an individual, usually the PDP, and say, we have audited your access and we want to know why you've accessed patient X, patient Y, patient Z, whatever the case might be. So you as a medical assistant, if you're granted that amazingly heavy and weighty responsibility of being able to access that information, you need to keep documentation that is consistent with that power. The second interest is that of the patient. Patients cannot opt out of the PDP. The only way to opt out of the PDP is to not accept controlled substance prescriptions, not to get them, not to fill them, not to engage them in any way, shape, or form. So it's not like a patient can simply call the office and say, I want to opt out, don't send my information to the PDP. It's not optional. The PDP is a requirement, and participation in it is required of physicians and pharmacies. So the patient interest in that is that if a patient isn't really entitled to know what is in the PDP with regard to them, and they don't have the ability to keep their information out of it, the requirement to be careful, or the need to be careful with that confidential information, is amplified since there is no defense in saying, well, the patient agreed to be in a research study, so clearly they knew that people would be accessing their information. Misuse of the PDP is serious, it's often criminal, and it is a significant responsibility to patients because they cannot keep their information secret. So if you are designated as someone who can access the PDP, do not go past your boundaries in terms of the patients that are in front of you. Don't look up people for whom you have no legitimate reason to access the PDP, and be very, very careful that when you do access the PDP, you're keeping great documentation about why you needed it and what you did with it.